I believe in talking about the reading brain, really just the brain in general. We need to learn what it's capable of. And for starters, let's discuss neuroplasticity. Some consider it a mixed blessing, but more on that in a minute. Looking at this long word, neuroplasticity, we see two terms in there. The first one is neuro, or short for neurons, and the second is plasticity, which you can see the word plastic. Now, if you know plastic is a substance you bend or change, or it's malleable. What is neuroplasticity? So here's the definition of it. The lifelong capacity of the brain to change and rewire itself in response to the stimulation of learning and experience. I like to say it this way: neurons that fire together, wire together. What does this do for us? Neuroplasticity offers us several blessings. One is that it increases intelligence by forming connections among diverse concepts stored in our brains and by adding new information to stored knowledge. Did you get that? It actually increases our intelligence. You may have heard from me before that whatever knowledge we already have in our brains, that when we learn something new, the new knowledge has something to hook on to, right? And then it expands, thereby increasing our knowledge base. So we can keep on doing that, and our learning or intelligence will keep expanding. Another blessing of neuroplasticity is that it enables us to break bad or destructive habits by forming new beneficial neural pathways. So through effort and discipline, we can form new habits that our brain will help us to override, if you will, those bad, nasty, destructive habits. These include bad physical habits like smoking. Instead of lighting up that cigarette, go for a 10-minute walk and do that each time. Or emotional habits like depression or road rage. You just have to know what to do to replace it with, or what strategies to apply to replace these old habits with the new positive ones. Sometimes that means dealing with your power thinking and get rid of that stinking thinking and developing that growth mindset. But as you are consistent in doing the new habit, it will slowly take the place of the old habit. So not only does neuroplasticity increase intelligence and help us break bad habits, but it can help people recover from emotional and physical injury. For example, a tragic hit and run left Simon Lewis so broken that the paramedic at the site initially mistook him for dead. Despite his serious condition, Simon would eventually make one of the most remarkable recoveries from severe brain injury in medical history. See, Simon's brain injury destroyed a third of his right hemisphere and caused severe internal bleeding. When the doctors evaluated him, he scored only 3 points on the Glasgow Coma Scale. Now, people with that score only have about a 7% chance of survival with a good outcome, and that's if they remain in that state for less than 2 weeks. But Simon's coma lasted over a month. When he finally woke up, he had almost no awareness of his surroundings. He had forgotten how to read or write, and he could barely understand what others were saying. His attention span was minimal, and he scored the lowest possible IQ test score. The doctors predicted he would have to depend on others for the rest of his life. Simon was lucky enough to get the help of a therapist who refused to give up on him. Despite his seemingly hopeless case, his therapist made him work on cognitive therapy activities constantly, and by the time she finished with him, his mental abilities had more than doubled. And after only 2 years, Simon went from practically helpless, to living on his own with only minor assistance. Today, Simon, he is completely recovered, and he now has an IQ level of 151. He's even written a best-selling book about his recovery story. Here's another story. Brett Becker was enjoying his college winter break with his family on a ski trip in Wisconsin. See, Brett was a freshman at Indiana University studying biology, with hopes of one day becoming a doctor. On January 4th, 2016, his fun family vacation turned tragic. Brett went off a ski jump and overshot the landing area, falling sideways, landing on his head and shoulder, and breaking his clavicle. He required resuscitation, he was in ICU, etc. You can imagine his future now becoming just really surviving. But Brett's story doesn't end there. He went through major interdisciplinary care and different therapies and just graduated, quote, normal in 2020 from Indiana University with a degree in recreational therapy. It's an amazing story. You can find it on YouTube. And there are many other similar stories just like this, all thanks, amongst other things, but thanks to our brain's neuroplasticity. One thing to be grateful for neuroplasticity is that it also gives us the potential for intellectual development throughout our life. See, neuroscientists used to think that the brain stopped developing in adolescence. That meant that any damage that occurred to the brain in adulthood, such as loss of motor function, say because of a stroke, was permanent. We now know this is not true. The brain is a highly active and malleable learning machine. Knowing that, we can develop strategies to improve our well-being, like engaging in activities that are new and challenging no matter our age. You should have an idea of what neuroplasticity is, so now let's watch a visual presentation of neuroplasticity.
Not so long ago, many scientists believed that the brain did not change after childhood, that it was hardwired and fixed by the time we became adults. But recent advances in only the last decade now tell us that this is simply not true. The brain can and does change throughout our lives. It is adaptable, like plastic. Hence, neuroscientists call this neuroplasticity. How does neuroplasticity work? If you think of your brain as a dynamic, connected power grid, there are billions of pathways or roads lighting up every time you think, feel, or do something. Some of these roads are well-travelled. These are our habits, our established ways of thinking, feeling, and doing. Every time we think in a certain way, practice a particular task, or feel a specific emotion, we strengthen this road. It becomes easier for our brains to travel this pathway. Say we think about something differently, learn a new task, or choose a different emotion. We start carving out a new road. If we keep travelling that road, our brains begin to use this pathway more, and this new way of thinking, feeling, or doing becomes second nature. The old pathway gets used less and weakens. This process of rewiring your brain by forming new connections and weakening old ones is neuroplasticity in action. The good news is that we all have the ability to learn and change by rewiring our brains. If you have ever changed a bad habit or thought about something differently, you have carved a new pathway in your brain and experienced neuroplasticity firsthand. With repeated and directed attention towards your desired change, you can rewire your brain.
I've talked about how wonderful neuroplasticity is, but are there dangers? And maybe that's too harsh of a word, but negative effects too? One of those negative effects of neuroplasticity is forgetting. The neural decay through infrequent use. This is like losing a foreign language. If you were ever taught a second language, but you didn't use it every day or used it less and less, then you're bound to forget it. I remember having 2 years straight of Spanish, and I did very well. But after years of not needing it, not using it, I have forgotten most all of it. Just like forming good habits, you can do the opposite and form bad habits. If you reinforce negative thinking patterns or destructive emotions like post-traumatic syndrome, this will be the normal neural pathway, so we have to be real careful on our thoughts and habits. Well, in our world today of technology like 5G and beyond, and everything being smart, in our online world that we live in, and our self-driving cars, and the list goes on, what does that do to our brain's neuroplasticity? Well, that is a good question, and I don't think we really know the complete answer. But here's what we do know. Technology changes our brains. There is no denying that. The use of technology affects and will change our brains. For one thing, it reduces our memory stores when we rely on technology rather than our brain. We are not using our memory functions as much because, well, we don't have to. Another is the GPS reduces our ability to navigate in real space. I mean, who reads a map anymore, right? We get our smartphones and our smart cars to take us wherever we need to go. Multitasking among devices reduces our ability to focus and concentrate. We've got not just one computer monitor, but we might have several, perhaps looking at 2 or 3 at the same time, or at least 2 different websites at once, or jumping from one thing to the next, checking my email, looking at the site, replying to the text, looking at this cool TikTok video, clicking on this link, right? It's all in a matter of moments, too. You know what I'm talking about. So it makes it almost impossible to really focus and concentrate when we're doing that. And see, we know the ability to focus and concentrate is critical to college success, life success, career success. But we lose that ability. In using our brains, when we're talking about reading and how that has an effect upon our brains, then it is apparent that we should discuss the topic of deep reading. It's important to know what I'm referring to when I say deep reading. So deep reading is the slow, contemplative reading using inferential and deductive reasoning, analogical skills, critical analysis, reflection, and insight. Expert readers can do this in milliseconds, really, but this is only after a long time of practicing it. So it can take years for young readers to learn. Reading was a new cognitive function invented, they say, about 5,500 years ago. I mean, there was already the language abilities at birth, but the development of reading the written words came about, and neuroplasticity allows the brain to form those new connections among existing brain areas of the vision and hearing, cognition, and language. Now, in today's world, we look at deep reading versus digital reading. Is there a difference between the two? Well, scientists say they are. Let's look at how digital reading differs. Here's a good quote about digital reading that I think puts it in perspective. We surf the internet, gather snippets of information, and click hyperlinks that bring us to different topics and authors. In less than a second, we can go from reading about Beethoven, the composer, to watching a clip about Beethoven, the St. Bernard. This kind of reading encourages a passive kind of reading and thinking, whereas deep reading is active reading and thinking. So we know that deep reading is good and shallow reading is problematic, which begs the question, what do? Do we throw our phones in a lake? I don't know anyone who's going to do that. I guess you could raise your family off the grid. But that's just not realistic, is it? What we have developing, according to those who study this, like Dr. Marianne Wolf, is a bi-literate brain. This means young readers especially would develop the capacity for reading in two languages, print and digital. It is a lot like children who learn to read like bilingual readers do, and perhaps children could learn to read each medium, that is digital and print, and switch easily between the two, without experiencing the same struggles as adults do. Either way, we have to maximize the benefits of digital media and minimize. Knowing what we know about our wonderful, amazing, awesome brain, shouldn't we then use this to our advantage, right? What's that mean for all of us who want to develop and encourage deep reading no matter the medium? Well, first we must be mindful of metacognition, to actually think about how we are processing information and noticing when your brain is changing in negative ways so that we may stop that, so that we can reach our goals. And what I'm trying to teach you, metacognition is key in keeping us developing. We must think about our brains, think about our thinking, and the input that we are consciously putting into our thinking. And I teach the intelligent practice formula in my courses as not only controlling your mindset, but also creating the formula for success. Developing that grit, that the effort involved is up to you. And I teach you how to use resources to get help from others to help you along the way. Do you think Brett or Simon, that I mentioned earlier, just came back physically and mentally on their own? No. They used fantastic therapists and doctors and others who knew what strategies would help them and their brains. We talk about good strategies, for example, Cornell Notes, Study Cycle, and effective strategies for deep reading print material like the 25 Good Reader Strategies. We also need to learn strategies for deep reading digital material too. And there are programs out there to help online with this as well. This is an example of one that helps give you support while you are reading a text online. And before I finish, I also don't want to overlook listening to audiobooks, because there are benefits here as well, and I will briefly touch on these. The actual listening audibly to a text being read, preferably while you are looking at the text and reading along, develops those neural pathways for complex text in the auditory portion of the brain. This auditory knowledge is then ready for connecting to visual representations while reading. So in the brain, the auditory neural pathways are connecting to the visual representations. Listening to the book being read, it makes it smoother, or it eases the silent reading of complex text. And finally, audiobooks can help with the study of grammar and those grammatical structures. In summary, we started by learning about the brain and the blessings of neuroplasticity, as well as some downfalls. We looked at the process of deep reading. We discussed the role of technology and digital as it relates to our deep reading process. We also talked about the development of the bi-literate brain. Overall, there are strategies that we can incorporate to encourage our deep reading process in either digital or print. Finally, the benefits of listening to audiobooks and how that benefits our brain processes as well. Now, as any good deep reader would do, go back and review this video and pay attention to those key terms to increase those neural pathways.